I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, a Minnesotan in Pennsylvania, taking some classes at Penn State, and my husband at the time was in graduate school at Penn State. We became good friends with the couple that owned and ran the independent bookstore right across from the bank that I was working at the time. And of course, I've been a lifelong reader and haunted bookstores, loved bookstores, and they offered us as a couple the job of being manager and assistant manager of their new store in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Ultimately, we took that job and fell in love with the business of bookselling, which meant that I wasn't going to go to graduate school in art and become an art professor. I wound up going into business and being a bookseller, connecting books and authors with readers and enabling that process. So it was not long after that, in fact about a year and a half, when we decided to come back to Minnesota and open up our own bookstore. That was on Grand Avenue in Victoria Crossing, and it was called Odegaard Books. That's how I got started. I just sort of fell into the business and then fell in love with selling, buying, displaying, selling, promoting books and reading. So I think it's almost an outgrowth of having a high quality liberal arts education that literature is part of life, something you love.
Gee. So you had a really good education.
I think so. I think I might not have been in business or had the enough belief in myself to believe that I could do this if I hadn't gone to St. Kate's and had so many fantastic women role models there.
I see. And anything particular stand out from that time?
When I was in college?
Yeah.
Boy, and I think it's just the whole experience. I lived on campus. I really enjoyed the camaraderie, the teachers, the girls I got to know. The nuns were brilliant in that they brought world-renowned people to our campus, people not just from the United States, but from around the world to do convocations. I don't think that the university does convocations in that way anymore, but for us it was really enlightening. We could listen to talks, and then afterwards we could go to a reception in St. Joe's Hall. We could sit on the floor around this famous poet's chair and ask questions. It was pretty mind-opening and enlightening. And then I think ultimately that's what connecting books and reading and literature with people is all about, opening up people's possibilities and helping them. In other ways, we used to say we were bibliotherapists, because people would come to us with the most remarkable stories, and they would want us to recommend a book that would help them to get their child through this grief, to get their child through this understanding of prejudice or bullying or innumerable problems in their children's lives. And we could do that because we knew books well enough, and we knew that we felt that reading a book that obliquely touches the issue gets to the child in a way that talking about the issue directly won't be able to do it, because they throw up a wall because they're in pain about whatever the issue is. or scared about that issue, and then they just don't listen. But if they read a book about it, especially if it's not about a person, if it's about an animal that is struggling with a friendship issue or something, they internalize that. They get tools to deal with whatever the issue is that they're dealing with. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent there, but that was one of the more interesting things about being a bookseller all my life. Pretty much all of my life. The authors are the other piece. I know you haven't asked me about that, but that was very exciting to get to meet all of these wonderful, famous people, brilliant writers, or activists, or the span of people that I've met since the first bookstore opened in 1978 has really been remarkable. I sat one-on-one with Sophia Loren one afternoon. I got to talk to Jimmy Carter face-to-face. Tommy DePaula used to come to the Red Balloon every year. We just loved having him. He started coming to Odegaard Books because Noreen Odland, who was kind of the dame of children's literature at the University of Minnesota, was a friend of Tommy's, and he would come and to her classes every year. Well, he dedicated one of his books, The Clown of God, to Noreen, and we had opened up, Clown of God came out in 1978. We opened up Odegaard Books in April of 1978. Noreen came over to check out the new bookstore, and then she saw that I had ordered enough of them. I was the children's book buyer, that I had a face out of Clown of God. And we were the only bookstore in town that had it faced out. Well, she was like, well, okay, we're going to get Tommy over here. So that was pretty exciting. And Tommy then came. I ordered every one of his books that was in print. So we had the entire body of his work that was available on our display when he came to the store. We had some amazing, I'm sorry I keep saying that, but it's been an exciting life to meet all these people, to read all these books, to expand knowledge for me and for my customers. I kind of joke that a bookseller knows a little bit about an enormous number of things. Because of the industry that you're in, you're exposed to all of these new ideas that are coming out in the world. And there are season after season. There's a spring season and a fall season, and you're presented with all the new books, the new authors, the new ideas. It's pretty exciting.
How does that work exactly? I mean, there are bunches of new books. What's the mechanism by which you find out about them?
Well, we were a good big bookstore, so the publishers sent reps to us, and they'd open up their bags of samples, and for the children's books, we got to see F&Gs, which is industry language for folded and gathered pages. So we got to see pages of a book with the illustrations, but they weren't bound together. They were loose pages. And sometimes there was a dust jacket. Sometimes there wasn't. Most of the time, though, we had full galleys. Not final. Sometimes they needed more editing or more, there were things that were missing. So anyway, we'd sit at a table with all of these F&Gs and make a decision. One, did we want to buy it? And then two, if we bought it, how many did we want to buy? And then we'd try to talk the rep, if it was something we were really excited about, into sending the author to come to the store. So
this is all with the rep there?
Yes.
I see.
They make appointments, and then we sit down with their bag of goodies and peruse it and give them numbers. Back in the day, before we had computers for inventory control. We had computer cards, card stock that we had adapted for our purposes, so we could keep track of the invoice numbers and the dates they were ordered. And then we used the cards for reordering. But we were unique in the bookstore business to have the inventory cards, both at Odegaard's and at the Rebelloon, because most bookstores they ordered it in, and then the reps would come by and they'd inventory all of their books and then sit down with you and do a reorder of that publisher's stock.
So, I mean, the reps have to have an interest in you're not getting stuck with a bunch of books, right?
Yeah, it's not.
They absolutely can't believe totally and completely in their entire catalog, right? I mean, they're not pushing their whole catalog at the same rate.
I think the reps were smart enough to know which books would sell better in which stores. Yeah. They were very capable, so they would come in knowing what kinds of things we would want to stock in our store. So they had an expertise about that.
So they were essentially recommending that for your customer base in your store, the things in their bag that day would be the right sorts of thing.
Right. It wasn't in their best interest to put something in the store that we were never going to stand behind or sell, and that wasn't appropriate for us. But that book would be appropriate for some other store.
Nice.
So yeah, they were wise that way. But generally speaking, in the Rebelloon anyway, Carol and I bought together, and we gave each other veto power on books, and we would have often a little discussion about a title. And the rep was participant in that discussion. And sometimes we'd get excited about a book, and I'll come up with the idea for the event we were going to have for it while we're sitting with the rep doing the buy. But books are easy to reorder. Now that, computer systems are up and running, it's easier to do what was called just-in-time ordering than it was previously, when you had to think about buying enough to last you until you placed another big order. So now there are other ways to order the books, so you can get them, keep the inventory cycling through the store.
And you're taking a lot less risk.
Yes. Yeah, but books are returnable to the publisher.
Yeah.
It's expensive to return because you have to pay for the freight to go back, and you have to pay for the payroll to do it and to pack them up and all of that. But you do get money back from the publisher, credit back from the publisher, not literally money, that credit that can apply to your next order. And that's been true in the bookstore industry, I think, since the publishers started selling books through bookstores. I don't know that there was a time when books were non-returnable. You could choose to buy them non-returnable, and then you got a better discount off the retail price. But we surely never did that because I don't know. Then we've got a lot of dead books on your shelf, and then your bookstore starts to not look fresh, and you don't have money because you're not selling them.
Yes. So essentially, the publisher is sharing your risk to a certain extent.
Yep.
The stuff that he's done.
That all changed a little bit when the internet and the big mega chains came on the scene, because they would order enormous quantities of a book so that they could build a pyramid of it in the front of their store, knowing full well that they were going to return 90% of what was in that pyramid. And so it drove, that in and of itself drove the price of books up, because the publishers figured in the enormous returns from the chains into the price of the book. And it also meant that sometimes we couldn't reorder a book because the publisher was unwilling to reprint the book because they knew they were going to get so many returns. And then that was really, sometimes I can think of a couple cases. Once when we were hosting Tom at DePaula, we couldn't get enough books in stock because they were all sitting on display tables somewhere. And same thing with Harry Potter books. Those were sometimes really hard to get, so we had to be creative on how to do that. And it forced us to order in bigger numbers because we were afraid that it would go out of stock.
I see. Now, there must be a certain number of books like Harry Potter and like things that have won the Newbery and won the Caldecott and so forth, that where it's pretty easy to say, I'm going to need a lot of these.
Yes.
People will read the reviews, people will come in. And then there are some things you're taking a real risk on. You may like them, but you can't be sure your customers will like them. How does that work? And have you gone out on a limb for books?
Yeah, but we go out and I'll tell you a little story about a book, a particular book that I think the Red Balloon launched, and we had a lot to do with getting it onto the backlist at the publisher. They had a print run of 5,000, which is a standard print run for an okay book that's going to have library sales and a few bookstore sales, and then it'll be out of print. It was just, it was a title on the list. Well, it filled a niche. It was a board book about the Christmas story called Guess Who's Coming to Our House, and it was the animals thinking, we're going to get somebody else in our barn, and who's it going to be? And it was a very accessible book about the Christmas story for preschoolers in a board book format, illustrated by Ashley Wolf. Well, when Carol and I found out from the rep that there was only going to be a 5,000 print run, we thought, well, that's it. Now we're going to have to order big, or we're not going to be able to reorder. And we were going to be able to hand sell this book. We were behind it. We liked it a lot. Beautiful illustrations. So we bought a huge number of that book. And the rep went back to he would come to us first because he'd get a sense of what his list was like. What we bought was often his bestseller for the rest. So he'd want to come to us, and then he'd go to his next store and he said, well, the Red Balloon bought. And then they'd up their order, So he sold himself, of that 5,000 run, he sold like 3,500 books in the first 2 weeks he was on the road. And the publisher upped the run. And that book is, I think, still on the backlist. So we just kind of think, great, we did something.
Yeah, well, this whole project of hand selling fascinates me. I mean, how much of that do you do, and how does it go?
That's what it's all about, I think. I think people who come to the Red Balloon are looking for someone who has read the books, who knows the books, who has enough experience in children's books and with kids to be able to make a good recommendation. At Christmas time, we would have people, especially grandparents, aunts, and uncles, who had a list, sometimes 8, 10 kids, that they wanted books for. They'd hand us the list. We'd ask them questions about the kids. We'd give them an assortment of books for each kid so they could make their own choice about what appealed to them. And we gift wrap them for them, and they'd come back for the birthdays, for the next year, for Christmas, because they knew that they got something that those kids loved and were happy with. And we had the expertise to make sure that the book they were giving was going to be a book that they were going to fall in love with, that was going to be age appropriate and interesting for that kid at that time. So we had the funniest ones were the uncles who were coming home for Christmas. They had no idea what their sister's kids want or what their brother's kids wanted. And they weren't married themselves. They had no clue about children's books, but they found that we were a sure bet. And so that was one of the funnest things.
I guess I'm thinking about the other night I was at the Chase lecture.
Oh,
A
yeah.
fellow named Hanks who does fine illustrated things, and listening to him, he sold me on his books. I went home and ordered one, but I couldn't, I'm thinking about the young kids I know. I'm not sure. I don't know whether they share my taste. I mean, will it succeed with them is still an open question. The fact that it succeeded with me after his rather particular introduction wasn't a terribly, wasn't evidence that it would work with
I would
kids.
say the kinds of people who are invited to the Chase lecture are going to be sure bets anyway.
Well, I would guess that too.
I don't think they're. I think they're not going to invite somebody who doesn't do books that will be read. That's the thing. You don't want to give a book that's not going to be read.
But I'm curious how you figure out as a bookseller what's going to appeal to kids of a certain age. I mean, it's a different question than what appeals to you, or even than the question, what should appeal to kids? I mean, there are plenty of things I love, and I think kids should love them too, but I don't think they do.
Well, I think every kid is different. I used to give talks at ECFEs. I'd get invited out to talk to young parents about books with their children, and I often opened up those talks saying that you raise your child's IQ by reading aloud to your child, and the beautiful thing about reading aloud to your child is you have snuggle time with them, and in today's world it's hard to find a time when everybody slows down and you sit together with your arm around the child and a book in your hand, and the child's engaged with you and with that book. But the most successful children's books, picture books, are books that appeal to the adult and to the child, so that the adult enjoys reading that book over and over because the child enjoys the book and wants to have that book read over and over. So I also encourage parents to not just give their kids books that they like, but to broaden the selection of illustration choices and language choices, and character choices, so that they learn about the diversity in the world, the diversity in art styles, the diversity in literature itself, so that they have a background with which to make intelligent choices themselves about what they like. So if you only like realistic artwork, your child will probably like realistic artwork, but they might not ever discover impressionist artwork or modern art if you don't take the time and have the open-heartedness to expose them to different kinds of art.
Now, this activity of reading books over and over and over again, I mean, that's there from my youth. I remember coming out to my mother in the garden, or I'm told I came out to my mother in the garden with a little wagon full of books that she should stop doing her work to read. Some of them I couldn't even stand, but I wanted them reread anyhow.
Well, you wanted the time, the one-on-one time with your parent.
But now, I mean, I'm hearing from a librarian that there's some kind of ambition to get people through 5,000 children's books by the time they're 7 or 5 or something. And also people, there are lots of other things for kids to do and lots of other things for parents to do. Is this rereading thing, this, learning a book by heart thing still happening?
My youngest grandchild just asked me to read a book that both his parents had read him on the same day. I think it's still happening, but that's in my own little universe, and I think it's too bad that so many kids now have devices, because I think they can overtake human interaction in that device thing. That's a person interacting with an electronic medium solely by themselves instead of in community. And I think also there is value in giving a child cultural literacy, so that there are certain fairy tales and cultural stories that are part of the fabric of our human condition, our life. And you want your child to have that background so that they are culturally literate, I think. And I think that goes back to having a variety of books, but the reading a book over and over again, I think is something that a child really likes to do, because they liked that story. They want to learn more about that story. They know when you're reading that story, it's predictable. A lot of their life is not predictable, so they get to know that Max will come back. I'm thinking of the book Where the Wild Things Are. They know that he manages to get back home and his food is still warm. It's a gentle and loving thing to do with your child, to read aloud to your child. Also, I think you should continue to read aloud to your child from before they're born throughout their life. So I have one boy whom I read aloud to all the time. But he was slow to read on his own, and I think it's because in his head he's thinking, I'm not going to get the story times now. But that wasn't true. We kept on reading. He became a voracious reader, and when he was a young married man, he and his wife read aloud to each other every day. So, his wife was raised in the same kind of atmosphere of reading aloud in books, loving literature. And they still, even though they have a preschooler, find time to read. So I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I remember with our own kids, Mary Ellen was the champion at reading aloud. She could do Three Ducks and a Squirrel and get different voices in Freddie the Pig.
Uh-huh.
I was less comfortable. I didn't feel like I did it very well, and I would wear out sooner than she was. So I kind of ceded that reading aloud to her more. It's a skill. It's not a skill that everybody quite has.
Well, but you don't have to read a picture book with different characters with different voices. You can read a chapter book to a preschooler too. And that it may have been something that might have been more comfortable. I remember that I read The Hobbit to my son when he was 5. And he kept track of all of the myriad of characters better than I did. we just read a little piece of The Hobbit every day, and the picture books later in the day or a different time in the day, and always the picture books at bedtime. But he got hooked on the Tolkien characters, and we there's nothing that says you can't read books like that, even though they don't have pictures. 'Cause you develop a child's imagination.
Something funny that's happened to me in the last while, I suppose it's kind of strange, is partly because I taught kids using picture books for a lot of years.
Sure you did, yeah.
Is that I came to people I probably should have encountered at age 2 at more like 32 or even 42. I mean, I discovered Margaret Wise Brown in that way. And so
But you know, her books were not as widely distributed as they are today.
Yeah.
So there are books that I discovered when I got into book selling that I didn't find when I was a kid. Of course, many of them weren't published because I'm no spring chicken.
Yeah, well, but the funny thing though about Brown is, I mean, I've written sort of academically about her, and I may write more. I think she's, if you take her stuff right, she's about as interesting as anybody, and not just for 5-year-olds. But
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that happens to other people. I mean, are things like picture books taken up by adult readers in a serious way, not necessarily just for kids? I mean, at the Chase lectures, you run into people who think about them that way.
I think most children's authors are simply writing books. They're not writing books for children. And their books happen to be published for children. David Macaulay books, Peter Cease books are notable that way. They're intellectually challenging, interesting to an adult. Very detailed illustrations that some people might think a child wouldn't like, but kids love them. Kids are smarter and more eclectic than most people give them credit for. Yeah.
I used to say when I was teaching with Arnold Lobel's stuff, which was my fallback, that the story Dragons and Giants worked best with a group with 2 PhDs each, and kind of felt, you know, it was fine with 5-year-olds. It worked a little, you know, it worked maybe a little better with adults, and you know, when you when the educational level grew, then the discussion got richer. Mm-hmm. I've never quite seen anybody. Margaret Wise Brown occasionally pulls that off, but I've never seen anything that played so beautifully across virtually every age as the Frog and Toad books, if you approach them right.
And interestingly, Arnold Lobel was one of the very first Chase lectures I went to.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So
he must have been kind of a splendid guy.
I think
that impression from the story and from the kind of thing he did.
Yeah, and his book was published long enough ago that the publishers are not doing full color, because each color then took a whole run. So his books were, many of his books were more of a gray, green, brown color scheme to cover the frog and the toad.
Yeah, that was an advantage, I think. I don't know that I'd want a multicolored Lobel world. I think of all the stuff that's been lost, and I wonder what you think about that. I mean, one thing I looked into a little bit years ago was what happened to Margaret Wise Brown's stuff. She had about 100 pieces.
Her artwork, you mean?
Well, the books that she published. So after her death, a lot of stuff got put out that was kind of lying on the floor of her apartment because she died so suddenly. But there's so far as I can tell, a pretty astonishing number of early things that have gone out of print and are available in places like the Curlin. And you must run into this problem of lost treasures, and I also think about the four-color process and the things done in the four-color process that don't translate very well to full-color printing. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think they translate. I think there's a charm to the simpler way of doing things. Now, illustrators are doing computer art, which is a whole... They think they need to come into the current century and do their artwork on computer, which I think loses a little something in translation, but that's just personal. I know it's the wave of the future, but...
Well, I'm just wondering, are there things that you mourn, that have gone out of print, become unavailable, that you kind of wish you still could put on your shelves?
Actually, I have so many books.
But even so, I mean, there must be something that, is a gap in your shelf.
I can't think of something. I was collecting books before I became a bookseller, and then once you're a bookseller, you get to see the entire range of what's coming out, and it's really easy to, well, I should put that in my collection at home. I have a spot on my shelf for that. That belongs with this book. I know a kid in my life who would love this, or last night and today I ordered 3 books from the Red Balloon. I just send them an email and say I want these because they're for my daughter and my daughter-in-law, and it's easy for me to acquire books. My husband says it's too easy.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of books. So I can't think of a gap I haven't filled, actually.
On your home shelf.
In my home shelf, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, I think about some things that I loved as a kid. Freddie the Pig. Mm-hmm. I was very fond of Freddie the Pig. Is Freddie the Pig still a thing?
Well, I don't know.
You don't have it on the shelves of the Red Balloon.
Well, we sold the Red Balloon in 2011, so I'm a retired bookseller now. I still shop there, and I still give advice. And I'm always, I think, sort of like a lot of professions, once a bookseller, always a bookseller, so I'm always talking about books to people. And one thing that has happened since I've retired from the Red Balloon is that I'm able to read more books for grown-ups. And so I'm kind of catching up there. So much of my life, my reading life, were reading books that I had to read for one reason or another. And I'm fully enjoying being able to choose books because I want to read them because they appeal to me, which isn't to say that I didn't enjoy all of the reading that I did in my work life, but some of it was required reading. Mm-hmm. I refuse to host an author if I haven't read the book. I always got the book read before the author came, or books.
So, looking back on your time, you've had a very rich, you've got through some really interesting territory.
It's been a great experience.
And you were in the kind of premier children's book place in the Twin Cities.
That's what we aim to be. Yes.
There are a couple of these that I like, but I think you're the oldest of the.
We are.
And and kind of the one that comes up first in conversation.
Well, thank you for that. I think the Red Balloon is more famous than people in the Twin Cities realize. Is our customers would travel, they would, and then come back to us and say, well, I said I was from St. Paul, and I said, oh, do you know about the Red Balloon? And they were shocked that people in New York and across the United States, and sometimes even not in the United States, but in Europe, would know about the Red Balloon. We had a terrific and far-flung reputation and international customers. And that's, Carol and I were very proud of that. And Holly, who bought the Red Balloon from us, is continuing our tradition of connecting children and readers with authors and books, and doing it in a very special way. Most of our full-time staff is still there 7 years after we sold it, so there's an enormous amount of knowledge in the brains of all the people who work at the Red Balloon.
So what do you think you've learned? I mean, about life, about children, about books from all this time working at, you start with the bookstore in Harrisburg, Odegaard's, the Red Balloon. What distills out? What sort of themes keep coming back for you as you think back over all that time?
Oh, you're asking me to think about my life as a whole.
Life and legacy. Life and legacy.
Legacy. I'm happy to have a legacy. I think I have a legacy. I think I've connected a lot of people. And people tell me that they were inspired by things that I didn't realize I was in the act of inspiring. I just got a note a couple months ago from a woman who I ran a mother-daughter book club for many years, and she and her daughter were in my book club, and she wrote me a note to tell me that her daughter was remembering me and our book club, and what a great experience that was, and how it informed her choices when she went away to college. I'm like, you don't know what ripples occur from what you do in your life. And I think it's very heartening to me to know that that I've set some ripples out there and that they're still rippling after all these years. So that's nice that people have memories that are inspired by something that I said or something I did, and unwittingly did so. Mm-hmm. I didn't set out to do that, but I do believe that that helping a child, helping a parent and child, helping a family with reading, that I'm committed to reading and the value of reading, and I think that that comes out in everything I do, whether I'm in the bookstore or not. So I don't know. I'm very happy with the life that I've had. You don't make money being a bookseller. It's a very you have to live very frugally in order to survive as a bookseller, but you have so much richness in your life that that far exceeds the joy you would get if you made a fortune, so to speak. I don't know. It makes me happy when I look back that I've had chosen the path I chose, and life just happens. I didn't imagine that I would ever be a bookseller or a business owner when I was going to college or when I was in high school. And life happens, and you make the best of what happens, and you run with what you get, and it works somehow. So
I remember one time I came into the Red Balloon and learned that Bound to Be Read had opened kitty corner down the street, and that they had a kind of inventory such that the Red Balloon, having the conscience it did, was sending people to Bound to Be Read for things they didn't have that people wanted, and and I thought, there's no way this little bookstore can survive against something like that.
Bound to Be Read had deep pockets, and they, if we wanted to, we did survive. We were intrepid. We did survive a lot of heavy-duty competition, but I think we did it because we were so committed to our mission, and because we were not going to be like the bookseller in You've Got Mail and think that your customers are going to be loyal to you no matter what. We had to continue fighting for the loyalty of our customers and making sure that we were out there doing our very best and as much as we could do to keep our doors open, keep ourselves alive. And we managed to survive a lot of big competition, but I think we were energized by that, and there were a lot of tough times, but you struggle through, and you serve your customer best by making sure they get what they want. So if a customer comes in and wants a specific title, which you do not have, and they need it before you can special order it in, then our policy always was to send them where we thought they could get the book. And so often we would even call another bookstore and have them put it on hold for our customer. In fact, there were times when someone would run down to the Hungry Mind and get the book and bring it back and give it to our customer. That was not unheard of. We were more likely to send people to the Hungry Mind than we were Bound to Be Read. Yeah. Because Bound to Be Read was being competitive with us, as opposed to the Hungry Mind, with which we had a collegial relationship. So, but that didn't mean we wouldn't send them across the street.
Yeah, no, I found that really admirable, and I found it amazing that you survived.
Thank you.
These events. I mean, one thing that you're doing for outreach is just events of various sorts. How many did you do a year, average?
I actually countless. I don't know.
Was it like one a week?
More than one a week.
More than one a week.
Yeah. We had a regular story time from the day we opened in 1984. A regular story time every Friday morning, an event every Saturday morning, year round. And then we added the special author events. We did summer camps for kids. We, I don't know, dress-up parties, teas, luncheons. We had cows come from the University of Minnesota in our backyard because the book was about cows, dairy cows. We had a dairy cow in the back that kids could see. We've done lots of characters. When 5 years after we were open in 1989, my son and a bunch of neighborhood kids dressed up in costumes. We had Peter Rabbit and the Berenstain Bears greeting the customers. I don't know, just every opportunity where we could connect with kids and promote literature and reading, we took it. So, and Holly's doing the same thing now too, doing events. for kids, not just little kids, preschoolers, but school-age children and young adults. And there is a small section of books for adults that we've had at the Red Balloon for, wow, maybe 20 years. Just a few grown-up books for the parents to look at, and for people in our neighborhood when Odegaard Books closed, and that's probably when we started it, actually, 96. Odegaard's closed in 96. Succumbed, really, to the chains and the rent.
Yeah, and it's, just holding and holding that such a prime piece of real estate. I mean, that bit of Grand Avenue.
Well, we did, rent was an issue because it's high rent on Grand Avenue. So we opened in a rented space in Victoria Crossing in 1984. In 1989, when we were trying to renegotiate our lease, we were having trouble coming to an agreement with the landlord. And so we bought a building just in the same block and tore it down and built the building that the Red Balloon is currently in. And that was in 1989. And that has actually saved us because we owned the building. And so we could charge ourselves whatever rent we could charge the Red Balloon a rent that the Red Balloon could afford to pay. So through a lot of lean times, we lowered our rent. We lowered the rent that the Red Balloon was paying, so the Red Balloon could survive. And ultimately, when we sold the Red Balloon, we gave that same extremely low rent to the woman who bought the Red Balloon from us, which business-wise is not too smart. But because we were committed to keeping the Red Balloon open, wanting to find someone who would run it the way we would run it, and wanting her to stay in business, we knew we couldn't charge a market rent to her. So we didn't. And the Red Balloon has survived in that space, in a building that was built to be a bookstore, which was another interesting experience. We had to build it according to St. Paul's library code, because books are heavy.
Yes, do I know that? Mm-hmm. Well, it's a tricky thing, How lean were the lean times? I mean, was there ever a question about whether you were going to eat and maintain the store, or whether you were going to be able to pay your own bills? How far did you have to go towards, how far did you have to cut back to keep this thing going?
For the really lean times came with the, well, they came in waves, so I guess I can't really say one was worse than the other. There were times when Carol and I, well, I'll back up and I'll say, because Carol and I were 50-50 partners, and I also owned other bookstores, Odegaard Books, Odegaard Encore Books, and Books for Travel. My time at the Red Balloon was less than Carol was able to give to the Red Balloon in the early years. So I was working at the Red Balloon about 20 hours a week. We put ourselves on the payroll so that there wouldn't be an inequity. The person who was working more hours wouldn't feel taken advantage of, and the person who worked the less hours wouldn't feel like they were taking advantage. They were the ones taking advantage. So we paid ourselves the same hourly rate, but had ourselves on the payroll. And eventually our employees were making more per hour than we were making, because it was lean times. And we were also not paying ourselves the rent we should have been paying. And the bookstore survived, and that was our goal. So that was good. I don't think Carol and I ever had trouble putting food on the table, but I did think hard about putting gas in the car. I would think about if I could make that trip to Anoka or not. So you get used to living frugally, but so, I mean, now I look back on it and I think all was good. So you have, our customers were spectacular, truly. When we moved from the rented location to the building that we had built, we had a crew of customers that helped us move all the books, and we borrowed book carts, and we had just a parade of book carts. We'd take the books off the shelf in alphabetical order, put them on the cart in alphabetical order, wheel them down the street, and put them on the bookshelf in alphabetical order in the new store. And we had a lot of customers who helped us out with that. It was really fun. There, in the early days of Odegaard's, when my son was first born, I was pregnant in the store, so everybody's watching the pregnancy, and I had customers give me silver spoons, a little silver cup, all kinds of wonderful greeting cards. They felt like that our bookstore baby was their bookstore baby, and it was one big, beautiful community that evolved. Snow days, customers would put on their cross-country skis and come in. So when I moved from a condo that I owned a block away from the stores to a house when my son was 6, I told the real estate agent I wanted to be able to walk to work because we were going to have customers that were going to be skiing in on snow days. And she really looked at me cross-eyed. She said, "You can't afford to live in this neighborhood." I said, "I know I can't afford to live in this neighborhood, but I'm going to live in this neighborhood, so we're going to have to find a house I can afford to live in." So, and ultimately we did. It was within walking distance, so I could walk into work on snow days. So, it was fun.
So, sounds as if you made a pretty rich life for yourself. I mean, planning these events must have been
it was fun, a lot of fun. We did a Madeline tea, and we did it at Cafe Latte. So one of our staff people who helped me with my costume, I was dressed up as Miss Clavel, so I looked like a nun. Mm-hmm. Had a head thing on, and I had a graduation gown, and we're crossing the street after our tea, and in 2 straight lines. We've marched all the little girls in 2 straight lines, and Miss Clavel is leading the line like she does in the book, and the light changes. So I tell the kids to keep going, and I stand there and stop the traffic like every nun that I ever knew when I was growing up would do. And the traffic just stopped for me, for the nuns holding the traffic for the little girls to cross the street. I don't know. There are stories, lots of stories like that. Fun, good.
Yeah.
So.
But it also sounds like really your life was pretty much the bookstore, or a good bit of it. Is that right?
Well, you know what they always say, you should do what you love. So, yes, it's true. The bookstore was another baby. All the bookstores were mine. You invest your heart and soul in it to make it work. But I wouldn't say that the bookstore was more important than my family, or but it was it was just a tremendous experience to enjoy your work life so much and to not feel like it was drudgery. It was a joy to go into work. And somebody once asked me, what's your job description at the bookstore? And I say, it is putting out fires. Whatever happens every day, you'll deal with it. There was plenty of work to do. I had no trouble finding stuff to do. But you were always where the buck stopped.